My name's Elizabeth Rich. I'm the Education Week commentary editor. And we're going to get to questions very quickly. We have two people out in the audience. I don't know if they're down yet. Jason, right here, and Tracy, I think, is right in the back of the room. So we want to get to as many questions as possible. We are going to ask you to keep them to a single question and not make it a paragraph. Please don't make me cut you off. I really don't want to do that. But before we get to that point, I do want to ask you a couple of questions on my own. But first, actually, I'm going to turn to the audience. So a lot of what you focused on, obviously, has to do with kids. I'm curious out there, we have a room full of district leaders who are obviously very good at what they do. How many of you feel that you got to where you are through sheer force of grit? Wow. Like, many. Raise your hand that high. High, super high. Okay. How many of you feel that if you really understood how grit works, that you might have actually gotten to where you wanted to get to sooner? Okay, sort of about the same. So I am curious about leadership for adults, right? We don't really focus so much on this. I think, if I were to ask you how many of you thought when you were 15 years old that you would be a superintendent or a district leader, how many people would raise their hands? Nobody. So it's a really hard job. It requires a lot of effort. There is pleasure, I'm sure, but district leaders really have to juggle a lot. Do you think there are things we could be doing better to help grow leaders?
I'm not a leader in the sense that you guys are leaders, right? I mean, when I lead, it's like 12 people, right? So I'm hesitant to say to a group like this, like, oh, here's how to lead. But I will actually point out the following. The root of passion really actually translates to sacrifice. So I know you love what you do, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of sacrifice at the same time. And I think it's well illustrated by an interview I did with one paragon of grit, Rowdy Gaines, who won the 100-meter gold medal in the Olympics in 1984. And he kept using these words, passion, passion, I love swimming. But then when he started talking about practice, he talked about how awful it was. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? He's like, all right, it's 4 in the morning, it's dark out, and raining. You have to get into a Speedo and jump into a pool again and again and again. He's like, do you get what I'm saying here? And I'm like, oh yeah, right, that actually doesn't sound that fun. He's like, oh yeah, and then you just like swim until you feel like you're gonna have a heart attack, and that's basically practice, and then you do it again. So I said, okay, so square this with me, right? You love what you do, but you don't love practice. Like, what's going on? My guess is this, is that any leader loves what they do with a passion, but there are elements, board meetings and, district hearings and like parents, yeah, exactly. I'm now channeling my mother-in-law here, that you don't love. And the end of the conversation with Rowdy, he said, I loved the whole of it, right? Like, I love the whole, it's a little bit like your kids. I mean, you love them, they also drive you crazy, right? So it's like, so I think that what I would hope for leaders and for any of us is that we would find something we would say, it's my passion, I love it. I love it enough that I will do the 4 a.m. practices, right? Like that I will do the hard meetings and so forth. And it's not the ambition to have something that it's fun every moment of the day, but as a whole, I wouldn't do anything else.
And the other thing, before we start with the questions, there was something that I read, maybe you said it, maybe it was somewhere else, about this issue of your detractors and you saying, be careful about how much you use grit to change school policy, right? There was an example of not using a contest, of grittiness for SAT scores, for example. So maybe a word of caution out there before the questions start so that people understand, what the range is.
I am not a very policy-oriented person. I'm not a policy-oriented person. I'm not good at policy. I don't really understand policy. Whenever anybody tells me about policy, it never makes any sense to me. So I'm going to be appropriately modest in what I can say about policy. But what I can say as a psychologist is that, when policymakers, who sometimes when I just hear what they say, it's like, have they even seen a kid in like the last century? Like they say these things about kids and I'm like, they're just like completely out of touch with like the psychology of young people. But anyway, so I'm reading this as a psychologist, and I'm like, wait, that's not how kids think. Like, that's not what drives people. What I worry about is that certain policies, like high stakes assessment of things like grit, what I worry about is that these policymakers don't understand that the measures of these things are highly imperfect. They are, in most cases, totally fakeable, and they've got a million other flaws. So I also worry that policymakers seem to think that the only way you could get a kid or a teacher to do something is to reward or punish them like a rat. And I don't know a teacher who went into teaching because, like it's going to be like another $1,000. Like that's not why people go into teaching. Right. And that's also not what drives a young person to be their best. So I think rewards, punishments, high stakes assessment on flawed measures for a non-policy person who's a psychologist seems extremely dumb.
Okay, you heard it here, people. You can take that home. So questions, there must be some in the audience, right here.
My name is Bondi Gibson. I'm blessed to be the superintendent in Jefferson County, and oftentimes when our teachers try to build persistence among students, they translate that into simply spending additional time. If they're trying to build persistence in reading or so what advice would you have as a leader trying to support them in other ways to build persistence among children than simply slogging them through building up? It's more like building immunity to pain and boredom. So, any advice you have would be most helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. It's like, I think, and you must know this better than me, but I feel like anything that you say could be misused, like it's like almost any good thing could be misinterpreted or, implemented in a kind of like ham-fisted way that doesn't work. But here's one thing that you might try to take back that would make things a little bit. You could say that Anders Ericsson finds when he studies world-class athletes at the very top of their career, right? Like in preparation for the Olympics themselves, they only do at the peak maybe 4 hours of true deliberate practice a day, right? Not 8, not 9, not like 20, right? Why? Because it is actually when you're fully concentrating on something you can't yet do with feedback, and then you're making your refinement, you're doing it again. It is exhausting, and I don't think that we should have, so the first thing I would say is, well, let's not have the expectation that kids should do like hours and hours and hours of homework a night, right? Like, well, why would we want to do that? They're developmentally a lot younger than a world-class athlete, and also not even the world-class athletes are spending like hours and hours and hours slogging through mindless stuff. So the first thing is, like, just take as an indicator that at the limit, we're talking about a few hours, that for young people, it's got to be a lot less than that. When I asked Anders Ericsson personally for advice on my own teenage daughters, he said, and he stroked his beard, he said, maybe they could do 15 minutes. Like, and he was talking about practicing their violas. Like, maybe they could do 15 minutes. And then I asked Roberto Diaz, who is the head of Curtis, which is the music academy that's roughly twice as hard to get into as Juilliard. And I said, Roberto, how much practice should my children do if they're, and he said, maybe 15 minutes, right? So it's quality practice, not sustained over tons of hours. The key is the quality, right? The key is it's mindful, it's appropriate, it's very precisely designed, and it's the quality is the message, right? Once you get quality down, okay, then we can start talking about appropriate quantities, but the quality should be the primary focus and the quantity the secondary.
Is there another question back there? There's one over here. I'm going to ask you while they're getting the mic. So is there an age that's appropriate also to start talking to a child about this effort-pleasure issue? I mean, so they understand what's going on there?
So your kids are smarter than you. You already knew that, right? Your kids are smarter than you. Actually, your processing speed, like your clock speed for your brain, it peaks at the senior prom and then it goes down after that, right? So I'm not kidding when I say that your kids are smarter than you. You just know more, right? So here's one lesson. I don't think it's shocking how early you can. Sometimes you think, oh, when do we talk to kids about the following, right? Because it's pretty complex. I wonder. I don't know, as early as you can, right? I love this children's book series, Frog and Toad. I don't know if you ever, Frog and Toad, Frog and Toad cookies, the kite, the list, right? Those are books for kids who are, 4 years old, to be read to, right? And all of those concepts are deeply psychological, right? They're about persistence, they're about delayed gratification, they're about like social intelligence. So I would say it's really never too early to start talking to kids about their own minds, about their own psychology, about their emotions, about their motivation. I have 2 kids at home. I know I'm a psychologist, so it's like weird, but I will say that I as soon as they could really talk about almost anything, they could start to talk about these things.
Is there a question over here?
Yeah. I'm Brian Pick from DC Public Schools. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you.
I bet you're a really cool mom, too. In the spirit of leaders to learn from, I'm wondering if you look out at the education kind of arena, particularly school districts or perhaps charter networks, are there particular places where you're seeing this work being done at scale? What are those places, and can you give an example of something they're doing? Thank you.
So great question about, where do I see work on character strengths? Or by the way, use your own synonym, right? Like, I don't care. You call it character strengths, call it SEL, I'm on the board of CASTLE, I love CASTLE, like, call it 21st century skills. 21st century is a lovely century, call them whatever you want to call them, like, I don't care, but I'll use the word character. So where do I see character work being done well at scale? I don't know what I don't know, so I'm not saying that, like, oh, these are the only, but I like the expeditionary learning schools a lot. Like Ron Berger is amazing. I think one of the things I really appreciate about expeditionary learning schools is that when they teach things like grit, and I had a recent email exchange with Ron about this, he said, you want to be careful. Don't teach kids about grit without also teaching them about really having an other-centered purpose, about having moral integrity. Because there are a lot of gritty people in the world, and think of your favorite political leader, right? Like, who are gritty, but maybe misguided, and that's really not a good combination, right? So, so what I admire about schools like the Expeditionary Learning, so not making any assumptions about anybody's political leanings, but just saying. So, so I think that schools like that, of course, I've done a lot of work in KIPP schools, but really the thing that that is interesting to me about those schools is that, they have the wisdom to know, of course, it's not just grit, right? Like, you don't want a school that's just about grit. The expeditionary learning schools are not just about grit. They are about grit and serving others. Or, what about curiosity and imagination? The schools that are doing this best at scale are really thinking about the whole child seriously, right? And not just thinking about grit plus SAT scores, but a long list of things that it means to be a whole person.
More questions? Wow, nobody has a question. I can't believe it. Okay, we have some questions from Ed Week reporters down here, including Evie, who has interviewed Angela.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Hi. When we talk about grit in terms of like extracurriculars, it feels like a really good way of explaining it. And we obviously know what a world-class swimmer looks like, but maybe we don't know what a world-class stay-at-home parent looks like. It's more measurable in that way. And also it seems like for a child, it can be, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. It can be a little more deliberate as far as like explaining, I'm practicing this. What about the children who have like less margins in their life, who, is there a way to identify the grit that they're practicing through endurance as opposed to practice? Like say getting to school or dealing with a difficult circumstance. Is there a way to make that more explicit as an educator?
So I will say this about extracurriculars. So first of all, I'm doing work with Margot Gardner at Columbia on extracurriculars in the high school record, and we're looking at massive data sets and asking the question, what do these extracurricular activities actually predict? And the answer is they predict a lot, right? It's not like, oh, there's school and then there's this thing called extracurriculars and that doesn't matter. Actually, if you look at extracurricular involvement, and I'll start here and then we'll get to like what you can't measure, but extracurricular involvement is a tremendously powerful predictor of what kids are going to be able to do later on in life. And I think there are a lot of lessons that are learned about teamwork, about interest, about sacrifice and work ethic that are easier for many kids to learn outside of math class. And in fact, it's probably most kids, and in fact the data would support this too. When kids are doing their activities, they say, I'm concentrating and I want to be here. When they're in school, they say, I'm concentrating and I don't want to be here, right? So this magical combination of working hard at something that, you know, feels good, and yes, it's got deliberate practice, but as a whole, I want to be here. I think that that's hugely important, and it's getting lost, I think, in a focus on standardized testing. So the second thing that you asked, though, is really important, which is what about kids who don't have opportunity, right? And since we're coming to the end of our time together, maybe I will answer this question in particular because I think opportunity is not something that you say, is it either, you know, character that matters or opportunity? It's really that opportunity enables kids to develop character strengths like grit. So the first thing about kids without opportunity is I think they need more, right? Like, sure, as a psychologist, I can think, like, how do we get to their grit? But like, first, let's just say that every kid has a right to be on a sports team, to be on a newspaper, to act in a play, to like do stuff that upper middle class kids can do. And now finally, to the current reality that the playing field is still uneven. It's absolutely true that some kids are demonstrating their persistence in their home life, you know, just like keeping things together, you know, taking care of baby sister while mom's at work. But I will say this, though that is true, one is that it's sometimes very hard for those kids to generalize those skills into calculus, into, you know, college persistence. And so it's certainly, you know, there, but it doesn't automatically make them able to do things like stay in school. And the second thing is, like, yes, you develop a certain amount of grit by taking care of baby sister at home and keeping things together, but the kind of structure that extracurricular activities enable a kid to progress from one skill to another under the careful tutelage and support of an adult, like a coach or a newspaper editor or a yearbook editor, like that, it's not quite the same thing. And so the imperative always, and I was listening to the presentation that came before mine, the very important one about poverty, and so, like it's the work of a psychologist to understand the development of human beings, but it is the work of educators to make sure that the circumstances are there for all the things that the psychologist says, what about this, this, and this. It's the work of educators and policymakers to make those possibilities a reality. So not character or opportunity, but opportunity that would lead to character.
Great. Well, that's unfortunately all the time we have. Please join me in thanking Angela.